What's more fun than using your supplies in different ways? Try new things and discover some cool options. How about turning small stamps into big designs to make pretty backgrounds? Let's just dive right in. I'm going to use the exclusive texture stamp set, which has lots of fun elements that are so versatile that you can use them over and over again and you will never grow tired of it. I'm going to stamp a bunch of different textures to a white card base. And for this I'm using Distress Oxide ink. I'm using one color and I'm going to spread all the textures over my card so they have a little bit of space around them. I'm using an acrylic block. Some stamps I will stamp a few times and others just once. I just clean them with baby white and they are super easy to clean. The ink comes off real simple. I'm also picking the smaller stamps. Not the really tiny stamps, but smaller to medium size. Then I put that aside to dry. For the next card I'm going to cut a piece of acetate. The acetate is slightly smaller than my card and it's a really thin acetate and I just wiggle cut it. And because the acetate is fairly thin, it's super easy to cut. And when I cut, I move my acetate the same like I would with fussy cutting. So I move my acetate and I keep my scissors still, except for the cutting move of course. But I wiggle my acetate, which makes cutting so much easier. I do measure with the card size, so I know it's a bit smaller than my card. And using acetate for this technique will give me the option to use it over and over again, which is really cool. I added my card with the acetate and the magnets on top on my make art station to hold it in place. And this way I have my hands free to do some stamping. So now I'm going to pick a few stamps again. I colored my card base with the same ink with an ink smooching technique and I have a video on that where I explain all about it and I've added a link for you in the description box below. So I stamped my image a few times next to each other, turning the stamp, so I get some versatility also with the same stamp. I had the same stamp in a few places, repeating the same pattern. And then I pick up the second stamp and I'm going to add some more of the fun textures. Combining different textures will give you some versatility on your cards. And repeating the pattern will also bring the complete design together. I stamp it a few times and then I stamp it also on the other side. I pick another stamp and then I'm going to add that in between the previous stamped images. So I keep filling up my border. And as you can see, the acetate is blocking the middle part, so you can just stamp over it. I pick another stamp and then I'm going to add that in between in the open spaces. And this way you get a bit of versatility and this is a fun way to create a pretty border. The border is filling up nicely and the open spaces to add some more texture are getting smaller. I measure if it fits. And if it doesn't fit in one way, you can try to turn it to see if it fits in that way. And now I'm going to fill up all the open spaces. For this I pick a really small stamp and I just stamp it by hand. And now you can see the result. I carefully take off my acetate and there you go, a really fun textured border with a wonky edge. For the next card I have a stencil and I add that on top of my card. I use the make art station to keep the stencil in place and then I'm going to use one of the bigger stamps to stamp over my stencil. And for this you need to press on your stamp, but you don't have to press like extremely hard because it's a mounted rubber stamp, which will help you get a really good stamped image even through a stencil. So I keep filling up my background with the big stamp and then I take a smaller stamp to fill in the little gaps. I want a nicely filled background with lots of texture. So I keep adding bits and pieces of the smaller stamp and in some weird way I keep seeing small bits that are open. So I keep filling them up and for this technique to work best you want somewhat of an open stencil. And now I'm going to take off the stencil and there you go, a really cool textured background. But I'm going to do a little bit more and for that I'm going to add Distress Glaze. The glaze will make the Oxide ink sort of waterproof or water resistant, which will help to keep it in place when I add another layer. And before you add your glaze, make sure that the ink is dry, so you don't get any smudges. So I put the stencil back on the card and then I'm going to add a transparent texture paste. And this one will dry matte. You can also pick a glossy one if you prefer that. And I apply it with my palette knife. If you want to know more about how you can work with stencils and paste and always get the perfect result, then I have a stencils and paste guide for you that you can download, and I will link to that in the description box. I'll fill the complete pattern with the paste. Then I'm going to carefully take off the stencil. So this is the result, and now I'm going to put that aside to dry. For the next card I'm going to use another big stamp. I added a piece of acetate on top of a card with magnets on both sides. Making sure that the magnets aren't in the way so I can add my stamp on the card. And I'm going to use two colors ink. I also used these colors for the background. And then I stamp my first image. Then I move the card a bit to the right and I add another piece of acetate. I measure with my acrylic block to see where my magnets won't be in the way, and then I add them in place. Then I'm going to stamp again with a different color. I move my card again, I lift the acetate so I can slide it under. Make sure the ink is dry before you move it, because I had a little smudge. But that doesn't mean that you have to have smudges also. A little smudge is nothing to be afraid of, because you can always fix it by layering something on top of it. So no big problem there. And I keep moving my card to the right, stamping, blocking it with two pieces of acetate. And the acetate is really a perfect solution because you can use that over and over again, so you don't have to use paper for this. And this was one of Ardit's really cool tricks that she showed in one of her videos that I thought I had to try too, and it works really perfect, especially with thinner acetate. So I keep on moving my card, adding the stamp with the two different colors, filling up the complete background. And this will give you another fun background with lots of texture, ready to turn into a card. Now I have two colored backgrounds and I'm going to tear off an edge of one of those cards, and I tear it downwards so you don't get the white edge. Then I put the torn card on top of the complete card and I add my magnets. I picked one of the smaller stamps again and I'm taking my medium acrylic block, which makes it easier to hold, and then I'm going to stamp along the edge. So I add about half of the stamp on the biggest card and the other half on the smaller card. I'm stamping with a brown color. This will give a nice contrast with the lighter colors, but it's not as harsh as a black or dark blue, for instance. I stamp all along the edge of the card and I fill the little gaps in between the stamps by turning the stamp and see how it fits best. And here are my two cards with a super cool border. This is a great way to get two cards in one take. For the next card I'm going to use a stamping platform. I added my card inside with some magnets on top, and now I'm going to add my stamps. And I'm picking 4 of the smaller stamps that I line up next to each other. I close the lid to make the stamp stick. Then I open it up again and I'm going to ink my stamps. Then I close the lid again and I stamp my first color. And they stamp perfect in one take, so I can get my card ready for the next color. So I slide my card up a bit. Then I ink up the stamps again with the second color. So I'm closing the lid again and I press on the stamps and I open it up, and there you go, my second row is ready. So I'm sliding the card up again, and now I'm going to repeat this for all my 6 colors. And I'm using this was Oxide inks in 6 colors, so I'm going for a rainbow again. And the Oxide ink is opaque and nice and juicy, and it stamps really well. And because it's a dye and pigment fusion ink, you want to make sure that your ink is dry before adding anything on top, like the magnets, so you can blot it or use a heat tool to prevent getting smudges. I keep moving the card up a bit and stamping with the next color to fill my complete background. This way you will get a nice repeat of patterns with different colors. So this is the finished background, and this will make a nice base for a card. Back to the first card that I showed you. I used some circle dies and cut out all the images. Now I'm inking up the edges of all the circles. I already warmed up my glue gun, Now I'm going to layer all the circles on the card. I'm going to mix and match the patterns a bit, so I get some versatility and variation on my card, as well as in the size of the patterns and the sizes of the circles. Basically, I'm just going for a pretty look. First, I'm using regular glue for all the pieces that are touching the card directly. And then I'm going to use the hot glue gun to add the next layer of circles. I add a bit of the hot glue to the back of the circle and then I add it to my card. I press on it slightly but not completely, so I keep a bit of the dimension added by the hot glue. And I'm just adding all the circles in place using the hot glue, and the top layer gets a little bit more of the glue, so it's a bit more elevated from the card. And this will give you lots of wonderful dimension and it adds some interest to your card also. I will finish this card in a bit, but first I go on with the next card. I have a piece of collage paper and I added a die cut flower on top. I cut that out of Kraft stock. And I've also cut 2 leaves that I glue in place. Then I fussy cut all the shapes. Next I have my sentiment sheet that I'm going to use to finish my cards. I've made this sentiment sheet available for you to download to use on your own projects, and I've added a link to that in the description box for you. And for the card with the stamped edge, I first added a piece of collage paper to a white note card, and then I added the stamped edge paper on top. And now I'm going to add the flowers and leaf in place, and then I'm going to finish it with a sentiment. And because my background is uneven, I'm also using the hot glue to add that to my card. This makes it so much easier to even out your sentiment, even with multiple layers. I finished the card with some purple glitter drops and adding little details like these purple drops in the same color that's also in the background will help bring the design come together more. So it's a great way to prettify your card. So these are the finished cards, one with some sparkling rhinestones and the other one with the glitter drops. Are you all set to give these techniques a try? Have lots of fun! And maybe this is your day to binge watch or you need some more inspiration. You can find some right here. And as always, make sure to keep on crafting!